Morning. You guys hear me okay? Nicely. I can always count on you, I appreciate it. Well, good morning, everybody. Appreciate everybody joining us today. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Western Governors Association 3rd Annual Western Prosperity Roundtable Forum. Thank you all for joining us in beautiful Bozeman. And special thanks to Governor Gina Forte for being our gracious host this week. My name is Jack Waldorf. I'm the new Executive Director here at WGA. And if this is your first Western Prosperity Roundtable Forum, it's okay, it's mine too. So welcome. We'll do this together. So while I've been on the job for about 4 months now, I'm proud to be part of such a strong and fiercely bipartisan association that is advocating for policy issues with such a broad scope and substantive depth. Of all the critical issues that the Western governors are engaged in, I've clearly had no choice but to hit the ground running. Like my predecessor, Jim Oxbury, I'm also a proud product of the West. Born and raised in Colorado, I attended the University of Colorado before embarking upon my professional career in our nation's capital as a congressional staff. After a number of years on the Hill, I came to my senses and returned to the West, where I was fortunate enough to take over the federal relations role from my alma mater, where I spent nearly a decade before joining WGA earlier this year. And as I mentioned, it's been a busy few months here at WGA, and I just want to take a moment to thank the entire community, yourselves included, for welcoming me to the fold. I'm beyond grateful for the governor's confidence in me to help build upon the proud WGA legacy. It's truly an honor to serve both the governors as well as the West. And I don't know where I'd be without the fantastic support of the WGA team, some of whom are here today and have just done a masterful job getting this forum set up. So I'd like to recognize the team. I know a couple of them are outside. I want to recognize Sarah, Shanu, Lauren, and Spina. You guys are all pros, and certainly glad to be part of your team. And now, for the reason we've all gathered here, whether across state lines or just across town. Over the next 2 days, we'll hear from a suite of subject matter experts, policymakers, and thought leaders about policies to advance Western governors' vision for expanded prosperity throughout the West. Historically, Western governors have built strong regional and bipartisan consensus around critical land management and natural resource issues. Their continued success in this space has led them to a new undertaking, to seek bipartisan solutions aimed at improving lives in Western residents through associative economic plans. And as they do, the governors work closely together to identify common needs from across the region, from tackling behavioral health care to increasing access to broadband connectivity and beyond. As a result, the Western Prosperity Roundtable was born and now serves as WGA policy platform for examining these cross-cutting topics and systematically addressing the closely intertwined challenges they present. This year's forum will expand upon previous efforts by Western governors and conversations about community capacity, including from the 2022 forum held last year in Oklahoma City by Governor Kevin Stitt, which focused on the implementation of transformational levels of federal infrastructure funding to identify and elevate strategies that are imperative to helping communities thrive and prosper. The extraordinary growth that the West has undergone in recent years has presented us both with barriers as well as opportunities to achieving increased prosperity. As remote workers and visitors flock to resort towns and gateway communities, left unchecked, this growth can strain already scarce resources and result in haphazard development, poor planning, and a host of other associated problems. In addition, the pandemic and the rise of virtual systems such as telework, distance learning, and telehealth have transformed the ways in which people live, work, learn, and play, and have modernized how we provide vital community services. The sessions during this forum will thoughtfully explore these considerations by examining how to strengthen community resources and ensure that smart, sustainable development to effectively manage the growing West. Our distinguished panelists will discuss the interconnected and often compounding resource constraints across human, physical, and financial dimensions, and how to address them to promote more livable and desirable communities here in the West. And what better place to hold this conversation than here in beautiful Bozeman, a rapidly growing and changing city and a state that was long considered rural, where community members are grappling with the same issues that we see occurring across the Western U.S. and possibilities that exist to define their futures. So once again, thank you for your interest, for your participation, and for your contributions to these critical discussions that the governors will rely on to make a positive difference in the lives of Westerners. So with that, I'd like to invite our first panel to join us up on stage.
So today we'll focus
on the first panel on the resources and services that allow communities to thrive and prosper, and how to strengthen and expand in Western communities, in particular rural areas. We have a great lineup of panelists to discuss this first topic, our access to affordable childcare. Childcare is critical to support a robust and equitable workforce in state and local economies. For childcare centers, families, and providers face persistent barriers. This panel, entitled Seeking Community Childcare Solutions, will explore strategies for the provision of childcare and the outcomes of these solutions that have had on communities. Our moderator, Linda K. Smith, is the Director of Early Childhood Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center based in Washington, D.C. Ms. Smith is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Early Childhood Development at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, where she oversaw policy priorities for children from birth to 5 years old, including Head Start, Early Head Start, childcare programs, and served as a liaison to other federal agencies. In addition, she has previously served in leadership roles for Childcare Aware, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and the Office of Family Policy for the Secretary of Defense. Renner, take it away.
Thank you. And you did not say, and I have to say, Jack, I was listening to him the other intro and saying, you had this sense to come back to the West. I'm actually a native of Montana, and I have not had that sense yet. And every day I come back here, I say, why not?
There's still time, right?
Okay. So I want to thank everyone, welcome you to this session. As I said, I'm Linda Smith. And what we're going to be talking about today is childcare. I want to thank the Western Governors Association for actually putting this on the agenda, because it is a very serious issue and challenge for most of our states nationwide, but especially our rural states. And so when we were asked to come and do this, I don't think there was anyone on this panel that didn't jump at the opportunity. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to do a very quick overview of what childcare looks like, and then we're going to go down the panel, and they are going to each give you a little bit more of information about what childcare is and why it is a challenge, and especially why it's a challenge in rural America. So I want to, see if I can make this work. This is just the broad overview of childcare in this country. This is what it looks like, 642 businesses, and I need to make sure people understand these are businesses. For the most part, they are for-profit businesses. And we'll talk about that, and especially Sue has some information in terms of the business aspect of childcare. The number of centers, 77,000, roughly 564 homes. And home-based care is a very important part of care in rural America, especially. Mostly women-owned small businesses. And it shows you the size of these businesses on that slide. And that's important because the number of children that actually pay for care to cover the expenses it creates what we call a razor-thin margin in childcare. So their profits are extremely difficult to maintain with so few children. I myself started in a center here in Montana for 25 children, and I can tell you that making ends meet with 25 children is nigh on to impossible. We have to figure that out. Looking at this, 50% of our centers serve fewer than 50 children. Those are very small, a lot of them, but small centers. And the annual revenue nationwide, in the last year we have data, was $60 billion. So not a small industry, actually. Looking at the employees, we employ about 2 million workers, split evenly between our centers and family child care homes. This is the little known fact. The research coming out of the HHS right now shows that over half of our teachers have an AA degree or higher. Okay, I think most people don't understand that, and yet they make very pitiful wages. If you look, these wages are up because of COVID, and they're actually up a couple dollars from a couple of years ago, but they're on average making $13.22 an hour. Compare that to the federal poverty rate, and you see what the problem is with childcare in the workforce right now. Nearly half are on some kind of assistance program, mostly food stamps, SNAP, etc. But that's a pretty sad commentary on the way we are treating the people who care for our children. And this was very prevalent, problematic, I should say, during COVID, when they don't have health care. Most of them do not have health care. So the need, let's look at that. 66% of all children in this country have all available parents in the workforce. That means that is a lot of children. Only 1/3 of our parents pay for children. So what are they doing? And we've got some data on this. But what we have done, and I'm going to show the Montana data here in a second, what we know is that we lack enough spaces for about 1/3 of the children who potentially need it in the United States. So if you are feeling pressure in your states for childcare, that's the fact, is that we simply don't have enough to meet about 1/3 of the kids who need it. The fees, I'm not going to talk about that because the fees are what they are. I think everybody in this country knows that they're high and getting higher, and if we raise the wages, the fees go up. There's no other way to deal with it. So if you look at it in terms of the market, what we like to say in terms of the child care situation, it goes down to the graphics, the little italic sentence. They are businesses, and with any business, when it costs more to produce the product than the public that needs it can afford to pay, that's why the market is failing us. So it's a simple business problem that we have, and we'll talk about that in a second. We have been looking at the need for care across the country, and we have mapped, and we take states' data, and we map their data against their potential need. And these are the states. The ones with red are the red stripes are states where we are currently mapping them. But what we've ended up, and that's why I can say with absolute certainty that we lack enough spaces for 1/3 of the children. We take state data and map it against the children, and we use a distance methodology so we know if there's no child care within a certain distance of the children, then there's no child care. It's not like we have a situation where there's just no child care, but there are no children there. We know there are children, and we know there's no care for them. And then we've done the economic impact of the child care, the lack of care, just the impact of the gap, and that's that 1/3 that we don't have. You see the estimates projected on the impact on household income, on the impact on business income, and on tax revenues to the states. That's the economic impact of not having that care for 1/3 of our children. I think we've talked about this, but what I wanted to do was put Montana's data up there and show you. And if you're in a state here and we have your data, we're happy to share this with you. We can get down to a city level and tell you what your gap is within your cities. But the gap here in Montana of the children who are with the parents in the workforce, the need is 44,000, as you can see. You see where the biggest gaps are in the state. And then if you go to the next one, this is the number of providers here in the state and the number of spaces that we have. So if you go back to those numbers, the gap is fairly significant, but look at the gap in the rural part of the state. And this is pretty consistent across our rural states. So the gap is much higher in rural parts of the country, but going back to what I said in the beginning, it's also very expensive to provide it. And it's an issue of where we really need to start focusing efforts. We've done a lot of work on understanding parents' use of child care. We know that child care really impacts parents' decisions to go to work, and you see some of the data here. Parents basically it's impacting their decision to go to work, to stay in the workforce, and that is even more true in rural parts of the country. Again, we've done specific surveys of rural parents to find out what's going on with them, and in rural parts of the country, those numbers are much higher. So here you see that 86% of rural parents that are not working say it's because it's been influenced by the child care available to them. So if we think that this is not a problem in our rural states, it's seriously a problem. And then there's some other data we have on what parents are looking for, obviously, and we can go into that, or I can share all of that with anyone who wants to see it. So that's kind of my overview of childcare in this country. And I'm going to turn it over to Sue Renner, who's our first panelist, who's going to talk a little bit about what has happened in Colorado and the work that Sue, and I'll let her say a little bit more about her background. Sue is the executive director of the David and Laura Merage Foundation in Denver. And they have done a lot of work, again, in rural parts of the state, but also with the business aspect of childcare. I think she can tell you more about that. So Sue, if you want to say a little bit more about your background.
I'm going to skip this slide for now. Can you that? Just turn that. I screwed that up. I'm not doing this right.
The green one is go.
I know. That's not. All right. I want to go back to the one that's now. But, so yes, Sue Renner, Executive Director of the Laura Merage Foundation, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about philanthropy and the role of philanthropy as you guys are trying to problem solve childcare. I'm going to make the assumption that childcare is not working in every single community that you live in, that you serve. If it is, fantastic, but most in the country it's not, and it's for the reasons Linda just said. It is a failing market. Just keep that in mind. It primarily is a free market. About 96% of the care is private. But it's failing because it's so constrained. It's constrained by what parents can pay. Keep in mind they're in their lowest earning years when they have little ones. It's constrained by the business of childcare. These are small, independent businesses. And this is what our work, the David and Laura Merage Foundation, has been about for the last decade, is seeing what we can do to help intervene into that market and try to create some balance for these small businesses. And we've worked primarily on the business side. Before I tell you about that project, though, I just want to let you know that philanthropy can also be an important and valuable partner for advocacy for policy reform. I believe deeply that we need to right-size our investment in young children in this country, our public investment and our employer investment in young children. Just to give you guys a quick snapshot, our federal, state, local, all combined investment in infants in this country is $500 per infant. Compare that to K-12, which is $12,800. So when we wonder, why is childcare failing? Why can't we get this right? It's got to be about, part of it has got to be about the public investment. So as a private foundation, we are outside of government and we can really push. And one of the things we did in Colorado is our universal preschool. This was a ballot initiative that went to our voters 2 years ago, right in the midst of COVID. They were asked to increase taxes, and they did that. 2/3 of our voters approved funding for universal preschool in Colorado. And where our foundation and as private advocates we came into play was to push hard that those dollars could be used in a mixed delivery mode. Those dollars could be spent in childcare and layered onto childcare. So please think about your philanthropy partners. They can be really, really key for you with advocacy. On the ground practice work, we've been deeply involved as well. And our foundation actually incubated a program in our office. We spent our philanthropic capital, but also our in-kind business support. So don't forget that when it comes to philanthropy as well. And we created a model of shared services, a way to make small, independent childcare businesses big where it counts with business, yet small, keeping them small and intimate where it matters for children and communities. And so what we've created is a virtual back office service for childcare providers that's now expanded to 16 states, including Hawaii. And this service basically lifts off the administrative burden from childcare providers, gives them more time and more money to spend on children. And then, equally important, it increases their revenue. So this service helps them tap federal, state, local funding sources that otherwise they wouldn't be able to do. They wouldn't know those dollars exist, or they wouldn't have the ability administratively to get those dollars. So it's a really, really important service, and it's something that we are trying to spread rapidly. We would love, if any of your communities are interested, please talk to me afterwards. I just have to make a disclaimer. They're no longer part of our foundation. They're a separate 501c3, but I often use the term we because I feel so close to them. And the other thing we've done is we've worked with employers in Colorado. So that we helped start an organization called EPIC, Executives Partnering to Invest in Children. And these are business executives that put early childhood education at the top of their advocacy. And during COVID, Governor Polis wanted to do more with EPIC when it came to employer-sponsored childcare. So he set aside a substantial chunk of COVID dollars to help incentivize employers to start on-site childcare. Our state legislature has now renewed those dollars twice. We just had $3 million allocation to that. It provides a startup grant to employers, but most importantly, it provides the technical assistance. We now have over 10 of those childcare centers in operation, really unique locations. We have one at a ski resort. We have one at the Denver International Airport. We have the first high-rise childcare center in Denver on the 16th floor of a high-rise. And that's all because of this program called Building Up, which is employers getting involved. This isn't just government. We really want employers to take their load as well. And then last but not least, we've been involved in a project with Governor Polis called the Public-Private Partnership Office, P3, where they're using state land all throughout Colorado to try to build both childcare and housing. They have 4 projects in the works. One is at a corrections facility, which will serve corrections employees. One is at, again, a rural resort area where the Department of Transportation is doing both housing and childcare. And 2 are at institutions of higher education. And again, our foundation has been very, very interested in this because all of you guys is about trying to make these childcare model work. So when an employer can either sponsor the building or the state can provide the land, it starts to make that math more balanced. And so we're looking for any way we can to make sure that these small independent childcare businesses can thrive.
Well, thank you, Sue. Okay, I just wanted to say our next speaker is Jody Becker. She's the Region 10 administrator for the Administration of Children and Families out of the Department of Health and Human Services. She actually has a 4-state region. I'll let her tell a little bit about herself and then what the work that they're doing.
All right, thank you so much. And then I'll try and hit the green button. Thank you so much, WG, for the opportunity to be here today and share some information from a federal perspective in terms of some of the resources and partnerships that we have available. Similar to Jack, this is my first Western Prosperity Roundtable. I've been in my role for almost 12 months and definitely hit the ground running. So it's good to be here with all of you today. A little bit of background on me just quickly. I forgot to do that. I come to the regional administrator position with about 30 years of public service and nonprofit sector service. We serve Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and the 272 federally recognized tribes that have tribal land in those 4 states. So one of the things I bring to this position is a real desire to strengthen our commitment to government relationships and really think differently about how we can meet the needs of our tribal nations as well as our states. As you can see from this slide, the mission of ACF in terms of early care and education is twofold. It both focuses on children and families as well as the early care and education workforce. As I begin to talk about some of the resources, I want to begin by just briefly talking about the American Rescue Plan Act. This is an act that was passed a few years ago, And in some states, resources are still available and to help stabilize the early care and education system. As you can see from this slide, stabilization grants have now reached over 220,000 child care providers, potentially impacting approximately 9.6 million children. We know that these grants have been a lifeline that prevented many child care providers from closing their doors during COVID. Some states are continuing to offer support through stabilization grants, while others have already distributed all of their grants. In addition, our Head Start programs also receive supplemental funds through this act. We have made it clear through our guidance for Head Start grant recipients in particular that their funds can be used for the recruitment and retention bonuses and efforts to support their staff. Last fall, ACF released guidance across several programs encouraging state and local partners to creatively use funding in the Child Care Development Fund grants, Head Start, and the Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5 areas. These guidance documents clarify and strongly encourage using these federal funds to improve compensation and develop professional development and career advancement opportunities for the workforce. We've issued several Dear Colleague letters over the past few years encouraging bold investments in workforce compensation and highlighting promising strategies that we have seen in states and many local communities. In March, we published a Dear Colleague letter that highlights the fiscal year 23 appropriations. And just to preface, I'm giving you a lot of information about a lot of things, and we'll make this slide presentation available for those who would like to have the links to all of the documents I'm referencing. Next, I'd like to share some information of funding that came through the most recent appropriations bill. The Child Care and Development Block Grant received a $1.85 billion increase in fiscal year 23. With this grant, states have flexibility in determining how to use those funds. We encourage them to use them to increase payment rates and to support the early care workforce. ACF has shared guidance with child care lead agencies that include many different strategies and examples for states on how to do this. Head Start also received significant increases in the FY23 appropriations. They received a total of $960 million. $596 million is for a 5.6% cost of living, and $262 million is focused on quality improvement. In January, ACF announced that we awarded a new round of preschool development grants, Birth to 5, to 42 states. These grants totaled in the amount of $300 million. In the past, states have used these grants to enhance teachers' compensation and benefits, create more accessible and inclusive pathways to attain higher credentials and degrees, maintain or increase the diversity of the workforce, and support educators' mental health. Many states were awarded renewal grants and are continuing to invest in their workforce. For example, in Montana, they plan to offer mini grants to providers to implement innovative recruitment and retention strategies and provide funds in underserved communities to allow programs to offer free childcare services to their employees. Health and Human Services announced the launch of a new Early Care and Education Workforce Center in February. This center is a result of a $30 million investment to support research and technical assistance for states, communities, territories, and tribal nations to improve the recruitment and retention of a diverse and qualified early care and education workforce. This is an opportunity to spur research-informed solutions, strategies, and to support implementation for impacting this critical workforce. The center is currently working with a variety of partners and stakeholders to determine what their first-year activities will be. More information will be available later this summer, so stay tuned. One of the I think, greatest documents I've recently read is the ACF USDA Rural Development Joint Resource Guide. We know in rural communities in particular, in addition to workforce shortages, there is need for improved access to affordable, high quality, and early learning facilities. This joint resource guide was developed in partnership with the U.S. Department of Agricultural, Rural Development, and the U.S. Department of Human and Health Services, Administration for Children and Families, Office of Early Childhood Development. The purpose of this guide is to provide useful information to help stakeholders in rural communities, including tribes and tribal organizations. It helps them to address the need for improved access to affordable, high-quality childcare and learning facilities. I highly encourage you, if you're interested in expanding on these resources, to download this. It's a great guide, has a lot of tools across multiple agencies that allow someone interested in building facilities, renovating facilities, just where to go and who to contact. It also has very specific information for our tribal nations around grants that are exclusively for them. So please share that widely. We also know that changing, impacting, improving, enhancing our early care and education system cannot be done by ACF alone. It really involves multiple federal agencies coming together differently to figure out what are those creative, innovative solutions. Earlier this year, President Biden signed a sweeping executive order focused on care across the life cycle, from young children to people with disabilities, our veterans, and seniors. This executive order contains over 50 directives for every cabinet-level agency to expand access to affordable, high-quality care and provide support for care workers and family caregivers. More on implementation will be coming in the upcoming months as we dissect and work with our partner agencies on implementation activities coming from this executive order. This webpage here is a great resource. I just want to call it out. If you're looking for workforce strategies and resources, this is the place to stop. And finally, if you have not already signed up, please join our monthly webinars and receive monthly Workforce Wednesday e-blasts, which include relevant resource links and opportunities on how to support the workforce. Our next workforce event will be on May 31st, and it is focusing on promoting mental health and well-being for the early care and education workforce. That is just a brief summary of the many activities, resources, and partnerships that are underway across federal government. If you have questions, please see me during break or at the event later this evening. I would love to talk with you more, learn more about what's happening in your state and across the regions. Thank you.
Okay, so next we're going to go to Melissa Rooker, who is the Executive Director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund, and that is a state-sanctioned trust fund that has been around for quite a while. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who's going to tell you a little bit about the work they do in Kansas and her work particularly with the fund.
Thank you, Linda. It's nice to be here. I appreciate the invitation. As Linda said, I am the Executive Director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund. Kansas was the first state in the nation to create a children's trust fund. They did so in 1980. And then in 1999, the Children's Cabinet was created by the state legislature as a response to Kansas's participation in the Master Tobacco Settlement. They wanted to dedicate the state annual share of that settlement to early childhood focused issues. So we are a statutory entity. We have a governing board that is made up of political appointments but balanced between the parties. The governor has 5 appointments and can have no more than 3 from a single political party. And then the 2 legislative leaders and the 2 minority leaders each have a single appointment. So we have enjoyed stability in the governance of the Children's Cabinet since 1999 because it is very focused on the policy-driven agenda and not the politics of all of this, which is, I think, something that the early child bipartisan or a nonpartisan approach. The Children's Cabinet has specific statutory responsibilities. We advise the governor and the legislature. We direct the investments using what is called in statute the Children's Initiatives Fund, which was created as our budget for us to manage. The Children's Initiative Fund is budgeted annually. We sit at about $50 million a year. There's $30 million that is essentially pass-through transfers to other state agencies for early childhood programs, and then the remaining 20 is managed by our governing board. So we give grants to programs across the state and really focus on the well-being of children birth to 5 and their families. The Cabinet is also charged with making sure that we are coordinating among multiple state agencies. Ours is a coordinated early childhood system, which means we have the Kansas Department for Children and Families that receives the federal Child Care Development Block Grant funding, which pays the child care subsidy and child care quality improvement activities. The Kansas Department for Health and Environment is where child care licensing and a few other programs, home visiting programs and children's developmental health programs reside. Of course, the Kansas Department for Education has preschool programs, early education, Part B services for children with special health care needs from age 3 to 8. So we are spread across multiple agencies, and it takes some coordination to do that. So our mission is to make recommendations to break those that exist. We also have a research mission. We are supposed to engage in annual assessment of the efficacy of our investments. So on the strength of our statutory role and responsibilities, we took the lead on the Kansas Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5 activities. That grant program, which Jody mentioned, it's a federal program really aimed at strengthening the early childhood system in the state. So we had a 1-year planning grant in 2019. We used it to conduct a comprehensive statewide needs assessment. We traveled and held 53 community listening sessions. We took in more than 2,000 comments. We had comments from every county in the state. We had site visits. We gathered existing needs assessments from other programs. We conducted our own surveys and data collection. And out of that needs assessment, identified that where children live in Kansas matters, even in a given community. Their ability to access care is affected by where their parents live. We also identified that too many Kansas children are growing up in families where their basic needs are not being met. That's food, transportation, housing, health care, those basic needs. We have too many kids whose families are struggling. We identified access to care, availability of care, navigating the system, the child care workforce, child care facilities, the state agencies, the system itself, and I'm blanking on the seventh area that we identified as areas of need. And we also included bright spots because there was a lot of innovative activity happening at the community level in Kansas. We used those findings to craft a 5-year strategic plan for early childhood to address the needs in the state. And I will say, Linda, the data that you presented, we mirror a lot of those data points. 2/3 of Kansas kids have every available adult working in the workforce. The average wage for Kansas child care providers is a little bit over $10 an hour. So it is a sector that is in trouble. More than half our workforce is over the age of 50, and most child care in Kansas is delivered in home-based family child care settings. So we have a workforce issue that is deeply troubling. With the PDG strategic plan delivered in February of 2020, with March of 2020, a global pandemic setting in, our work was delayed but not derailed because we used our needs assessment and strategic plan to help frame our work with the pandemic relief funding that the state received. So it proved to be a really valuable resource to have done all of that pre-pandemic study and planning. So as we guided the pandemic investments, we framed them around the goals that we had in our strategic plan. We have delivered over $300 million worth of sustainability grants to child care providers in the state to try and help keep them open. We expanded eligibility for parents in the child care subsidy program to make it easier to access the assistance that's available. We have, throughout this last 3 years, we did receive a renewal grant of our PDG grants. So we have developed an online workforce registry for child care providers and a career pathway so that there is a framework for entering and progressing through the profession. Those are resources we'll roll out this fall, and I think our whole early childhood sector is excited to have been involved in the planning and creation of these documents and anxious for that work to be unveiled. We have created a data trust between the 4 key state agencies, and actually this last year the Department of Corrections joined the data trust, and we are working towards an unduplicated count of kids receiving services in Kansas and the creation of a more robust data system so that we can track the quality and results of the investments that we're making. We yesterday closed a grant funding program with some of the state fiscal recovery fund dollars. We're calling it the Child Care Capacity Accelerator. I've got a total of $39 million to grant. 20 of it is Child Care Development Block Grant ARPA discretionary funds, and the other 19 is from the State Fiscal Recovery Fund. We will use the $19 million to fund construction of new facilities or major renovation, because this is the first time that I've had access to funding that allows for that particular activity. And the other $20 million will be for operational expenses, the startup costs, and some innovation grants that we carved out. And I will tell you that my team gave me preliminary estimates from the applications that came in. Let me remind you, I have $39 million to grant. We received close to $110 million worth of requests for projects worth over $200 million in total. So projects that will cost more than they're asking for. So there's no way we can meet the need that exists and fill that need with that source of funding, but I hope that we can make the case that the need exists. And are addressing those needs. The other thing that we've been really focused on is upgrading legacy data systems. Our state agencies, like so many other states, are operating with chewing gum and baling wire. It is very difficult when everything is paper-based because your systems date back to the 1980s. So we are investing in more modern systems. We've put our fingerprint and background check process online for the first time in the last year for child care providers, and we are working on improving the agency resources as well. I want to make the case for why we're all here talking about this, why quality programs matter. It's established brain science that in the first 3 years of life, there are more than 1 million neural connections being formed in a baby's brain. And every interaction a baby has affects the quality, the nature of the brain architecture, for better or worse. So it behooves us to ensure that our children not only have care available, but it is good, high-quality care that they are engaged in. So that is our focus in Kansas, and I look forward to answering questions.
Well, our final presenter today is Laura Sappho, and she is from North Dakota with the Rural Development. She's Rural Development Director, the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives, and she has one of the nicest slides I've seen in a long time. I had something in mind that said, nope, she's got it nailed. So, Lori, it's you.
All right, thank you so much. And it's really great to be here in Bozeman with thought leaders to have this opportunity to talk about childcare capacity in rural places. So I operate a cooperative development center in Mandan, North Dakota. We serve the entire state, and we focus on quality of life in rural places. And some of our most recent projects, like we work in childcare, but we also work in rural food access and meat plants. And I know that sounds like a quirky mix, and sometimes I even get mixed up, and I'll refer to childcare capacity as per head capacity. But we do get things done, and I do keep it straight. I'm a practitioner, so I take what these ladies have just talked about, and I try to turn that into something that we can use to access to start up a child care center in really rural places. And so a lot of, like 2/3 of North Dakota is actually considered frontier versus rural, meaning we have 7 or less people per square mile. So the economics of it are quite tough. So I've worked at least 15 different rural communities to try to increase their child care capacity. I work with grassroots groups of people, and what this means is that they have a need for childcare, but they already have a full-time job someplace else, but they need to go through this process of developing a child care center so that they can
to open up that child care center with as little debt as possible. And once you get it open, to hire that director to handle the day-to-day operations of the center, to relieve the employers of that duty. And as the development of the cooperative moves forward, the employers then can designate parent committees to help do that busy work of developing a cooperative, so they can say, okay, we're going to have a recruitment committee, and that recruitment committee can go ahead and put together the job description and interview and select the director that they would like to care for their children. Or they can have a committee that focuses on finding the buildings that are available for lease or for purchasing, or what type of land there is. Or that fundraising committee that can go ahead and hold events to do some of that fundraising, identify grants and write those grant applications, or find that low interest financing. So another model then that's been popular in North Dakota, probably the most popular, is community-owned or quasi-community-owned. And so in our state, a city can operate a business as long as it's not competing with an existing business in the state, and as long as it's for the health and welfare of the people who live there. They don't have to incorporate a separate entity. They can operate it through the city. It's quicker than developing a cooperative, and I think that's probably why we mostly land with that model. And it's also a way to spread that cost burden among the taxpayers. So if they were to, like on a quasi-community owned facility, if they were to purchase the building and lease it to the operator, you could do some bonding and spread that cost, the repayment of that mortgage among many people. In the fully owned, community-owned model, the city then actually appoints a committee that oversees the child care center. They then hire the director, so it would be an employee of the city, and it's operated then through the city. And so we've been lucky in North Dakota. We have an anonymous donor that's partnered up with us, and so I've learned the value of flexibility, and federal funding, as much as I appreciate it, is not quite as flexible, and neither is state funding. But this entity has basically said, go in and work with the committee, do as much as possible, and when you hit that roadblock where you just can't get over the hump to get the rest of the money that you need, let us know what it is. And it's incredible what they'll do. They will raise $100,000 in a town of 300 people just to get over that hump and to get that final grant money into that child care. And I know it's been a debate about why incentives are needed, government incentives are needed for child care. And so this does get me to the slide that is up here, and we put it together. We have a magazine that we publish, and we thought it would be educational for policymakers as they thought about why that incentive is needed, because what was popping up sometimes was, in a private child care, the care could be $20,000 per year, and you multiply that by the number of children that are needing the care. Why can't you pay more? Why aren't you having the employees there? But that's not the typical example. At least it isn't in our state. So this is a nonprofit child care. It's in a very small community. And so suppose that the working parent has a salary of $40,000 per year, which is probably high for the typical service jobs that are available out there, the ones that we're not able to fill right now. And the care for the child is about $140 per week. You take that times 52 weeks, that's $7,280 per year, or 18% of your take-home pay. And so with this example, then, you also take the revenue that you can get from 14 children. That's the capacity of this child care center. That's $1,960 a week. It includes the salary, the benefits, utilities, building maintenance and supplies, no building cost. Like I said, we try to do this debt-free. We end up with really, really skinny margins, $49 per week. There's no way to give benefits or pay increases, anything like that. So with the jobs we have open and the child care situation we have right now, it's a difficult scenario. So for policymakers out there, I encourage you to think about flexibility and inclusivity. Like if you're developing a program for preschool operating costs and you put down that you need a minimum of 14 preschool children in order to qualify for that operating cost grant, 50% of North Dakota's towns can't apply for that money because we don't have that many preschool kids in our cities. Or with the federal government, the type of application forms that are required, I would say 50% of our towns no longer have an economic development professional because we don't have the tax base to pay those professionals, so we can't put those applications together and access that funding. So my final note, I guess, is if we could just make it as easy as possible, keep rural in mind, help us access those funds, it would help us do more in childcare.
Okay, well, what we're going to do, we have some questions that I can ask the panel, but before we do that, I want to see if there's any questions from the audience or thoughts. I think what we're really interested in is hearing your challenges and trying to figure out, do we have places or people we can refer or help with this? So anybody with questions, just hop in at any time. The one question that I want to ask a couple of these panelists, because this came up, and I think particularly with the rural situation, we really don't, you saw the margin on that slide of $49. That really is reality. We don't have funding for facilities. There's no margin there for anything beyond just barely making it. And I thought what you were saying was really interesting. I'd like the rest of the panel to talk a little bit about how do we actually grow childcare? I mean, we can fix what we have, but we're still a third short. And how do we get capacity beyond what we have if we have no profit in these programs? Sue.
I would just go back to this idea of staff networks. I touched on it a little bit, but we need to figure out a way to make these businesses bigger when it comes to things like purchasing, benefits, things like that. But the last thing we want to do is put all of these wonderful, small, intimate businesses out of business. So this idea of finding in your communities, and maybe it is the city, or maybe it is a large nonprofit like United Way, that can be the staffing backbone and that can do some of the work, Lori, you were talking about with applying for federal grants. So I think that's really key to this, is thinking about who can sort of bridge that divide between the fragile nature of their business operations and accessing some of this money. The more public money that comes in, you guys, the more accountability there's going to be. We're finding that right now with our universal preschool program in Colorado. We pushed hard for it to be mixed delivery, but oh my goodness, there's some providers out there who are not ready for this kind of public accountability. And so again, having some sort of network to help them navigate that, and also the business tools to be able to navigate that, that's really important.
You know, Sue, Colorado is one state where the governor's put money into facilities, and I think Idaho is another one where the governor set aside some money to try and seed getting facilities in places in the state that didn't have them. Has Kansas done anything like that?
Kansas is working in a lot of different ways. So I mentioned the grant funding that we're now using, but we also have been working to seed innovation at the community level. So we have a Communities in Action program, also pandemic relief funded, but we have been helping bring communities together around the table to map out solutions to their local childcare problems, because I think it was mentioned that every community is different. So when you have top-down state-driven plans, it doesn't map out and work locally in every community. So we make sure we have local government officials, if there's an economic development authority or a local chamber of commerce, we get them at the table. Education, so K through 12 and higher ed, so wherever we can pull in our community colleges and universities, along with our school districts, area providers, parents, and the business community. And we make sure that and philanthropy as well. So we have seen a lot of communities stand up, local community foundations. Phillipsburg, Kansas is a tiny little town that's off the beaten path. They converted an empty convenience store into a new childcare facility that handles about 50 kids, and they formed a community foundation. There is a network of larger foundations in the state that will give matching grants, and then we've driven some of our public dollars in as well. We are really working to figure out the public-private partnership aspect. We've got major meat processing plants, National Beef, Tyson, Cargill, that are matching community effort and putting money into
programs that expand access to childcare. In Southwest Kansas, the Economic Development Authority put together a game plan with housing developers. They have a massive housing shortage for their, that is a prime meat packing area, and low-income housing is scarce. They've got developers who have agreed to build childcare facilities for every X number of homes built in a housing tract. So there's a lot of ideas being brought to bear. We convinced our state legislature to beef up a childcare business tax credit so that employers who engage in activities that help their employees access childcare receive a tax credit from the state. So we are trying to work on all cylinders. The governor, at the first executive order of her second term this January, was the creation of an early childhood transition task force for Kansas. We are engaged in the process of mapping out a transition from this coordinated system to a single state agency, an agency devoted to early childhood, so that we can elevate the profile of the sector to a cabinet level position.
You know, I think that's one thing that gets overlooked a lot, and I don't know any in the audience have had experience with reorganizing in government. It is hard.
It is
and
hard.
I think Colorado just went through it, and it takes a lot. But one of the things that we saw during COVID was the states with the more efficient governance structures were the most ready to administer the money and to reach the workforce and to do a number of things.
I think the catalyst for this, and this was on the governor's mind in first term, but the pandemic knocked us off that path. But as we tried to put some of our pandemic relief programs into practice, we wanted to do a child care bonus, like a thank you or a retention bonus for the work that they did through the pandemic. There were 3 different state agencies involved because of the path that money takes. That's 3 different state agency legal departments, 3 different grant and contract offices, 3 different budget divisions that we had to get those wheels all turning in the same direction at the same time. And this was a choice that we all agreed needed to happen. It wasn't that we had to convince one of the agencies to come along. Everyone agreed and wanted to get it done. But getting all of those different departments all signed off with all the right MOUs and all the legalities and intricacies of the compliance that's necessary, we complicate it by having multiple agencies at that table. So I think that was the wake-up call that we have a serious problem.
Can I ask the question, how many of you are in governor's offices in the audience? Actually work in the governor's office? Anybody? Because one of the things that we have done, Bipartisan Policy Center for 2 times now, have mapped the federal funds going into the states. And I just put this out there to this audience, that there's only one of the major funding streams where the federal government tells the states where to put the money. And oftentimes we hear from state governments that it's because the federal government makes us do it this way. Well, that really isn't the case, with the exception of Part B in IDEA, that is by law in education, in the education department. The governor has the ability to organize this the way they see fit and the way it works in your state. We don't tell people how to do it, but we do call attention to the fact that, and Kansas is one state. In one case, we worked with your data, and I think it was in like 5 or 6 different agencies. And that's just not efficient. I mean, there's no way that that's an efficient way to manage something. So, do we have questions from the audience here?
Yes.
Over there.
So, my name is Mary Ann Wormerdam. We represent 40 rural counties in California. We have a very large ag sector, which also has with it, to support it, good percentage of the population of labor with unclear legal status. And I was just curious if you'd had any experience in trying to bring those families who typically want to stay less visible into appropriate childcare arrangements.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, we've had really good luck with that in Colorado by building up the provider pool within that, within those communities. So we were able to change some of our licensing rules and regulations. So now, if you're an undocumented adult, you can operate a child care program, which you used to not be able to do that. So to be able to have those small businesses, and going back to the staff network idea, there is a network that provides those primarily women with some support. And they've actually done it in a few indigenous communities. So certainly agriculture, but also they've been able to do, we've got an influx of African nations in one of our communities. And so they've been able to get those women to start, get the training and become providers. And that really seems to be a way to quickly build trust with the families.
Do you provide the assistance in their indigenous languages?
Yes. So the intermediaries are all in their native languages.
There's another federal program that you could look at, and I think we often forget that it's a part of the Head Start, but the Migrant and Seasonal Head Start program is something that could be looked at to expand, because it basically is set up to follow especially the migrant worker population. And it's a pretty good program, so it's something to think about. Over here.
I really appreciate, Cody Stone, Montana State University Extension. Really appreciate the examples that the panelists have provided of policy, systems, and environmental work to focus on this area. Some of those examples provided were tax credits, partnerships, and then also housing developments, respectively, for policy, systems, and environmental work. Specific to rural and tribal communities, what would be suggestions from the panelists of policy, systems, and environmental works that would be of most import for those communities to start working on to address child care issues and concerns within those rural and tribal communities?
I'd like to start that one because I came here from visiting the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow reservations. And we actually, for some of you who haven't seen it, we did a documentary on the Flathead Reservation last fall. And the need is way much greater in tribal country than it is, in the rest of the population. So I think the start point is, and we were talking about this because it's really, and I think sometimes it's hard for state, officials to know how to reach out to tribes. But I think we have got to, especially in Montana, reach out and get the tribes into the conversation. The Northern Cheyenne closed their child care center down. They literally don't have one now. They're working on getting one, but, and then the other thing we found, for example, the food program, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, is state administered. Neither tribe child care programs get that. Now, we have a really poor population of people, and getting food to children ought to be a priority. So how do we start communicating with tribes to make sure that they're involved and part of the state plan? And I know it gets a little dicey when it gets to sovereignty issues, but so much of this is just about really getting organized and talking to people. I'd love to talk to you more about that, because in this state, it's very all over the place. Just say that.
Could I add to that a little bit? Yeah, so I would also add there are specific resources for tribal nations through our administration for Native Americans that really help focus on some of the economic development as well as language revitalization programs that are so critical in many of the tribal early care and education programs we see. I would also encourage tribes who are running some programs. There's a number of tribal adaptations that are being researched currently in the early childhood space that really, I think, hold promising practices for taking well-known programs, adapting them to the specific cultural needs of that tribe. And then I think most importantly, I would say get to know your tribes. When you've worked with one tribe, you've worked with one tribe. They are all linguistically, culturally, historically, politically, very, very different. So take the time to reach out, to make visits to tribal lands, get to know people, get to know what the council priorities are and how to best connect to resources. And I think just capitalizing a little bit on what Lori said, I think there are many challenges in our rural frontier and tribal communities around the capacity just to apply for different funding sources. So not only do you have the capacity to apply, but then you have all of the compliance and monitoring that goes with it. And so I think together we need to think differently about how those applications are sent out, what those expectations are, and if there's ways that we can streamline them within and across governments.
We're working on that precise problem in Kansas. We've developed what we call the Common App. It is an online grant application portal. Once you create your profile with your basic information, any additional grant funding opportunity offered through, you have your account set up, so to speak. And it's a way that we can better blend and braid funding and do it with less of an administrative burden on both the grant writers and the state agency. To be honest, it makes the review of applications a little easier to manage and communications throughout the process. So we've been really mindful of the difference in needs in different types of communities, and we made sure that we moved a third of our preschool development grant funding out as grants to communities, and we specifically had 5 different strands to really focus in on the hard to access types of care. So infant care, non-traditional hours, rural, children with special health care needs, and then we just had a general innovation category. So we have tried to empower rural communities to bring us solutions that they would like to try rather than us telling them what they should be doing. And likewise, we have 4 sovereign nations in Kansas that are recognized, and we've tried to strengthen the relationships, just get to know what they're doing, what they are, share what we're doing, give them opportunity to apply for funds, and again, to craft their own solutions so that we are not going in and telling them this is the way we think you should do things. The cabinet is the statewide lead for the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, and that has been a really nice calling card, just to a happy. It's a program with no strings attached, right? And it's just here, let us gift you books for your children, and that has been a nice way to without any stress on anyone involved, introduce ourselves and say, would you like to join us in this effort? So that's been a fun project.
Another thing that I think has been really effective around the country has been there's several states, and they're western states, actually, New Mexico, Oregon, trying to think of Minnesota. There are several states that have added a person into the state government as a liaison to the tribal population, and I think that has been pretty effective in the states where they've done it. And it opens up doors and communications automatically. So there's something to be said for thinking about doing that.
We also have an Office of Rural Prosperity housed within the Kansas Department of Commerce that has existed since Governor Kelly's first term.
Other questions? Over here.
So I have a question specific to the Farm Bill. So I'm familiar with the forestry title and some of the other titles, but I'm really interested in the rural development title and where you could direct me in terms of a resource, maybe an organization that has a set of recommendations for the 2023 Farm Bill related to childcare and expanding the services in rural communities.
I actually love that question because we are actually working. There's probably will be introduced in the next couple of weeks the bipartisan bill. Actually, our Kansas senator and Senator Brown from Ohio and Smith from Minnesota are introducing a bill within the rural development portion of the Farm Bill to create a set-aside for childcare within it. It's not new money, but it will be a set-aside within the bill to try and take on some of these issues with childcare in rural communities. The Farm Bureau itself has actually made childcare a priority this year in their legislative agenda, so you might want to contact them. But when that comes out, be happy to share that with you. It's at least a source of funding that is a potential. And there are some other things. The other thing I was going to mention too is that will be standing up, I think in the next couple of weeks, a tax tracker, because we get a lot of questions from states. You know, there's two sides to the equation here, and you can do some things with direct funding policy going into child care programs, and the other side is through tax policy. Tax policy can be a big incentive to businesses to set up child care programs and get the tax write-offs for that. Also to parents with the child and the CDC-TC, the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit. Those are two taxes that some states have created their own versions of those, and we've got that information if anybody wants it. But it is something, especially in some of our more conservative states, where they're more interested in the tax approaches than they are in direct subsidy type things. And so we'd be happy to share that information with anybody interested in it. It's a living document because there are obviously changes going on all the time in state legislatures. Other question? Was there another one over here?
I think there's one.
Okay.
Thank you all so much. My name is Tim Freeman. I'm with the Harvard Growth Lab. I have a question about the regulatory environment, and of course, child care providers are regulated and for good reason, but I'm curious if you all could envision a change to the regulatory environment that would, of course, not lower quality or safety standards, but would it make it easier for child care providers to expand?
I'll take that because we've just had this battle in the Kansas legislature this spring. The bill put forward would have doubled child to adult ratios and reduced training almost in half. And put all that in statute. So a supremely bad idea to deregulate in that manner. The way we framed it, imagine if you were trying to solve the nursing shortage by setting policy in state statute to double the patient ratios for nurses and cut their training requirements. So the inflexibility of making it statutory, not regulatory, also made it worse because the authors of the bill took language from rules and regs that was written in the 1980s around the training, and they used that as the language for those sections in the bill. They just changed the training hours and requirements. So we've been working, the cabinet has provided a grant to bring in some outside consultants with expertise in the area to review the entire rule and reg handbook for child care licensing. We have 59 rules that need changed, and we have hired the technical writer who can just focus on cranking out the new language, so it isn't an agency lawyer who's also dealing with public health and environmental issues, but this is someone focused on the task. So we hope that this summer to roll out an agenda of updates to rules and regs. The agency has, there are currently hundreds of exemptions on the books, so we've been tracking the trends in those exemptions. We're updating, modernizing our rules. We are streamlining so that there is better alignment between federal program requirements and state level regulations. But one of the things that we've encountered is that local ordinances are more restrictive in a lot of Kansas communities. So I'm working with the Kansas Association of Counties and League of Municipalities. That's my summer project, is to bring them information about things they're doing locally that's making it harder for child care providers to function. So we're trying to make sure that as we are mapping out these changes that we're taking every layer into consideration to simplify that process, because a lot of it is not the state licensing rules themselves, it's the way everything interacts or doesn't, and the conflicts and burdens that we create.
I would just add on to that. I think that what we found as we were building the early learning ventures system was the inadequacies at the state level with their licensing systems and not having kept up with those and invested in those. And so you're asking childcare providers who are the least equipped to deal with these very cumbersome paper reporting. So when, something simple like attendance. It used to be that in Colorado that all had to be done by hand. Parents had to hand sign a form. Providers had to somehow get that form to the state every Friday, where then it went into, it was just mind-bogglingly out of date, just totally out of date with what we can do now with automation. So we're big proponents of not taking our standards down, but giving providers tools and ways, and giving states ways that they can use that information more effectively to run their business. So a dashboard every day that they can turn on and see. Do they have one of their staff members that needs to be immunized? That should be front and center information. They shouldn't have to dig through paper files to find that.
I think that one of the things that we're hearing this across the country, and one of the things that we keep saying, I think most of these guys would agree with me. What's happened over time is regs layered on regs layered on regs. And what we really need to do is stand back and look at these things and say, okay, this is 2023, not 1980. And what needs to be here and what doesn't. And I think and everybody always takes it that we're going to change ratios or training, but there's so many other things in these regs that could really be simplified. I think, Sue, that's what you're saying. And if states approach it from that, not just cutting, increasing the number of children somebody has to care for, but making it easier for them to do the work, I think is the approach that would get us further in this country. Over here. I think we're about out of time, so we have to be quick.
Merage Center, and we have advised governors and state legislators on regulatory reform. And it seems to me that our model sandbox is what we call sandbox. It's a federally endorsed program where we come in and we look at and help policymakers understand innovation and deregulate and set up a model where they could look at a specific part of the regulatory scheme and set up, say, a 3-year model. Many states have done it. We've been advising on this for many, many years, and we would be happy to talk with anyone, and I'll be here tomorrow as well. So happy to have a conversation.
I think we're about out of time, correct? I just want to say one final thing on that, though, is that, when I was in my former life with the Department of Defense, wrote the military standards, and people used to call us and say, send us your standards. Now, most people think the military has the model of everything, and the standards are gold standards. When I would send the standards to people that we wrote at the Defense Department level, they would say, where's the rest of them? Well, that's it. They were maybe 13 or 14 pages. And so I think, thinking about how you approach them and keeping them simple, we got to the right end goal with the military program without a telephone book of regs. So I think we can do this, but I always caution people about the lightning rod is ratios. And if you take that on, you're just setting up, a battle in your states. So I think that's it. I want to thank everybody for the questions. Thank the panel. Thank everyone for having us.